Hi folks, it's Mikel Weisser, staff reporter for Cannabiz News, and I am super excited to welcome you to this week's episode of the Keith Stroup Show. It's a weekly update on politics and marijuana. Ladies and gentlemen, the star of our show, Keith Stroup, is the man who launched the entire marijuana movement when he founded NORML back in the 1970s. He's in the trenches of Washington, D.C., fighting for marijuana every day. If you're keeping track at home, folks, you know it's been a busy week in the news. So, Keith, how's it going?
Well, I suppose in one way, because I live in Washington, I have to acknowledge that it wasn't wonderful to see the president come out and suggest somehow that he's going to go the Jeff Sessions way on marijuana. He didn't say that exactly, but as you know, in a signing statement, he seemed to suggest that he might not recognize what used to be called the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, it's now Rohrabacher-Blumenauer Amendment in the continuing budget resolution, which is you can't spend federal money to enforce the federal anti-marijuana law in states that have legalized medical marijuana. It doesn't protect us in the 8 full legalization states, but it's incredibly important because it does protect us in the 28 or 29 medical marijuana states. Well, the president tried to suggest that he wasn't necessarily bound by that because, of course, there's constitutional concerns. Well, the reality is we don't have line item vetoes on the federal level. In other words, the president either signs a bill or vetoes a bill, but he doesn't have the option of picking and choosing what part of that bill he likes. And that's what he was trying to do.
Yes. One of the opinions that I saw on this signing statement, which was on Friday morning, happy Cinco de Mayo, everybody, was from Tom Angle with the Marijuana Majority, and he was pointing out that this is actually like a 10th Amendment constitutional crisis, that the president does not have the power to take away states' rights, and also there's the separation of the checkbook between Congress and the president.
The power of the budget, there's no doubt about that. It belongs to Congress. It is not the president's. He can, use the holy pulpit and he can propose a budget and do all that, but it's Congress who, in fact, enacts the budget and controls the spending. So, he's on flaky constitutional grounds, but I suppose it just was one more indication that he's playing to his right-wing conservative anti-marijuana zealots in his core base. Well, we knew that, or he wouldn't have appointed Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. But there's nothing I've seen so far, and certainly including this signing statement from the president, that doesn't cause me concern. I am significantly concerned that the Trump administration and Jeff Sessions in particular is going to find a way to throw a monkey wrench into the legally regulated market in America, those people who have licenses and grow appropriately under state law commercially marijuana and sell commercially marijuana, fully licensed and paying taxes, etc. I worry that they're going to find a way to throw a monkey wrench into that.
Well, that would be a major economic impact on the country. According to ArcView in 2016, legal marijuana in America had $6 billion in revenues and about $27 billion in economic impact around the country.
In fact, they're even projecting that next year, once California comes online, it'll be double that. It'll be $12 billion. California alone is going to be $6 billion. So you're right. It's an incredible economic engine that has been started by legalization. But remember that sometimes when people are playing social issue politics, and especially where you're dealing with racial issues or drug issues or those hot button issues, they don't always respond in a rational manner. And so I'm not sure. I think if Jeff Sessions had his way, without question, he would shut the full legalization market down. It doesn't matter about how many jobs he would eliminate, et cetera. I'm not positive that Trump will allow that, but I must say I'm concerned.
When you say jobs, that same ArcView report estimated that there were 150 to 160,000 full-time jobs somewhere in America that were related directly to marijuana. So that's a major choice.
And it's going to double by next year. California comes online in 2018. So
Yes.
that's 14% or something of the total American population. So you're right. We have very powerful forces on our side, on the side of legalization. But I do say that my age and experience tells me to be careful, because sometimes in politics, they play out, if they're, a Southern bigoted person is going to be racist no matter what he's doing, and an anti-marijuana zealot's going to go to his death arguing reefer madness. And so I'm not sure they will make a rational decision. I think they might make a social issue decision where they think they're making a statement, which is, as Jeff Sessions said not too long ago, good people don't smoke marijuana.
Ouch. Yeah, it's hard to imagine what the win would be for Sessions and what kind of impact that would have on our society. With all those people employed in 29 states creating some sort of legal industries, it seems like a recipe for economic disaster.
Yeah, no, I'm without question, that would be the end result a year or two down the road. But that won't necessarily stop a couple of charged up ideologues, and that's what we're dealing with. I mean, we elected a monster as president, I'm sorry, but he has no common sense. He's boorish. He's everything bad that we shouldn't have in a president. But he got elected. So the question is, what's his marijuana policy going to be? I'd like to say he's going to be, as he said during the campaign, he believes in states' rights. I don't have to like Donald Trump. If he'll believe in states' rights and leave marijuana alone, I'll accept the fact that we're not going to make a lot of progress federally while he's president, but let's keep moving ahead on the state level, and let's keep proving it works and adding more state. But I'm not at all sure he'll give us that option. We'll see.
Even as we see the federal government making these kinds of moves around the country every week, especially right now, state legislatures are churning out brand new pro-marijuana legislation. So,
in fact, by the way, I'm proud to say on the East Coast, I grew up in the Midwest, but I came out here 51 years ago to go to law school, and I've been living on the East Coast ever since. So I consider myself an East Coaster, and I'm proud to say that the real action in terms of legalization in the last year or two, and I think it will be that way for a little while, has been sort of in New England and on the East Coast.
You were saying that New England is now called the New West because of all the activity.
Yeah, in my mind, politically, New England is the New West, because it used to be, when we thought about, where are we going to expect some victories in the next year or two, it was always on the West Coast. But more recently, without question, it's been in New England. And, we've legalized marijuana in Maine and Massachusetts. In the state of Vermont, it appears they have actually passed legislatively a version of full legalization. It's not perfect, but it's a version that's similar to what we have in the District of Columbia, where people would be allowed to legally grow a small amount of marijuana and possess and use a small amount of marijuana. So it's a version of legalization. And what's important is it's the first time a state legislature has agreed on that. So it appears that's going to be the new law, and in it is a requirement that they establish a commission to come back with recommendations on how to establish a legally regulated market. In other words, they recognize in the long run, most people aren't going to grow their own marijuana. It's a fairly complicated process.
Yes.
We can do it if we have to, but unless you're an aficionado, you probably are not going to spend the time or money to do it well. So it's in our interest, of course, to have a regulated market where consumers can buy high-quality marijuana, convenient, it's safe, it's been tested by a laboratory. You can only have that kind of consumer protection when marijuana has been legalized.
Shout out to this week's sponsor, ultratrust.net, for their support. Rocco Beatrice Sr., the founder of Ultra Trust, is one of the nation's foremost experts on asset protection. His articles can be seen in USA Today, ABC News, CBS News, Fox News, and many more. Rocco can help you protect your assets from seizure, creditors, legal actions of all kinds, and hide them from prying eyes. Visit Rocco online at ultratrust.net, where you can download his free report, Managing the Risk of Loss, and learn numerous ways to protect your assets. That's ultratrust.net, ultratrust.net. Now, one of the interesting things about this action in Vermont is all around the country, states are suffering from what's called Sin Die, which is the last day of the legislative session.
Yes.
And if you have stuff that isn't finished, it dies. But in Vermont's case, even though Friday was the last day, they have already approved an extension, and they're going to go back to work on reconciling the House and the Senate bills on Wednesday this week.
Well, it shows you in a way legislative rules, they're very arcane. And if you're anyone who's ever worked with a state or federal legislature, I mean, learning the rules of procedure, it's meaningless, but they've been built up over a long period of time, and you have to learn how to make them work to your advantage. So what this demonstrated was that when they say a legislature is going out sin die, which means the end of the term and that's it, oh, bullshit. It's a state legislature. If they want to extend the term a week, they can do it. So in this case, they wanted to. They realized that there was a lot of pressure for reaching some compromise. So, I mean, I think it's wonderful, and it looks like we're going to get what we wanted out of that.
While we're talking about New England, this last legislative session, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire have all also introduced legalization bills. Do you know how those are going?
I don't think any of them are going to make it through the session or be adopted. But it is fascinating when you realize that in New England, I think every state either just adopted legalization or had it as a open debate in their state legislature this year, one or two of whom, one is going to probably adopt legalization and one is probably going to adopt decrim, which is New Hampshire, which is a good step forward because that's a state that we've been expecting to get for a number of years, but we've somehow not gotten it through. It looks like they're going to have a good decriminalization measure in New Hampshire. So again, the next frontier, frankly, is the Midwest. The South will be last. I don't mean to be overly regionalist, but the way social issues work in this country, they start on the West Coast. They then show up on the East Coast. They eventually make it to the Midwest and then finally to the South. And I think marijuana is following that same pattern.
Well, let's talk about the Southeast then, because in the Southeast we just saw Florida come to the end of their legislative session, and it's quite a bit different story. Well, Florida failed.
Oh, I know. Florida seems a mess to me, and I admit that I haven't spent much time there personally, but I certainly have some friends who are well tapped in there. Norm Kent, the vice chair of our board of directors, is very active in all of Florida marijuana politics, as well as a member of our board of directors. But what has happened is they somehow managed to go through their legislative session and end the session and never agree on the terms of their legalization system that was approved by the voters last November. So I don't know exactly what that means. I mean, I know that the guy who put up most of the money for the initiative for the last couple of times it ran has argued that they should have a special session to deal with it. I can't imagine the Florida government.
Is that John Morgan?
Yeah, John Morgan, that's right. I can't imagine that a Republican governor is going to call a special session to deal with marijuana in Florida. I just don't see it happening. So I think what will happen is I assume there'll be some lawsuits and there'll be all kinds of crap, but I think it means a delay in the implementation of the Florida system because I don't now, it may mean that the Department of Health, I believe it was the Department of Health that was given the rulemaking authority under the initiative, but whatever state department, if they have their selves together. What they should do is just over the next 3 months come out with regulations and set the system up. If the legislature failed to set up a system as they were expected to do and legally required to do, then the Department of Health should just set it up and get it running. And then if the legislature needs to fine-tune it next year, they can. But frankly, the legislative system was not a great system anyway. For example, there was nothing in that initiative that said you couldn't smoke medical marijuana, yet you weren't allowed to under the regulations that the legislature was putting forward. And there were other limitations. They were still trying, I think, to limit the number of dispensaries fairly rigorously. And as you know, in their initial system, they had like 5 friends of the legislative leadership who all got contracts to grow the medical marijuana. So it's been a kind of an insider Floridian job all along.
The final battle that I was reading about was between limits on the numbers of companies that could be involved. John Morgan was arguing for unlimited number based on who applies and who qualifies.
Free market, yeah.
And a guy named Ben Pillara,
who, by the way, ran his campaign, understand. I mean, those guys have been allies most of the time, but in this particular time, they were on opposite sides of this.
Yes, and they were involved in the 2014 Heartbreaker campaign as well, weren't they?
Yeah, they sure were. The same guy ran the campaign for Morgan. And I think I don't know him personally, but he seems like a very talented guy. And Morgan seems, obviously, he knows what he's doing too. He's put a lot of money into an effort, but he saw in advance that it was eventually going to be a winner in Florida, and he's right. Now, what they do about that mess down there, I really don't have any idea right now, and I don't see any clue. So I assume it'll be a regulatory rulemaking effort for a few months. And then unless the legislature comes back in special session, they're not even a player until, a year from now, whenever they come back again?
Right. Florida, in fact, this morning I read that activists would rather wait till January of 2018 to have the legislature write the standards than to go with the Department of Health. The Department of Health actually filed a blueprint that the legislature was supposed to build off of back in January of this year, but apparently that got tossed out the window.
Well, by the way, also, do we know, was it particularly oppressive or offensive, or was it a reasonable system that they were proposing regulatorily? I don't know.
The activist that I read said that it would be inadequate. That was his word.
Yeah. Well, by the way, and I fully understand that our role as activists is always to be pushing the envelope. And if they're giving us a foot, let's push for 2 feet, and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sure in Florida they're feeling very much that they don't have an open system, that's for sure. They had to be, in the business of a florist or a landscaper, and had to be there for 30 years in order to qualify for the initial 5 licenses. That was a crazy kind of thing that obviously they were rewarding the friends of the legislative leadership. But I trust we'll get beyond that as this system gets rolled out. But I don't know. I don't know Florida politics well. What I do see, I don't like very much about it.
Well, before we wrap this up, I want to take a second and tip my hat to my home state of Texas, who, as of last week, awarded their first marijuana licenses ever to start off their medical marijuana program. So.
Yes, I think, by the way, if I'm right, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's one where they only allowed for intractable epilepsy or something like that. It's a very limited application, and it's a high CBD oil that's allowed, not a smoke. But unfortunately, their list of conditions, I think, is only that one. Now, if I'm wrong, correct me. But even that's a start. Listen, if you're living in Texas, where marijuana used to get you 20 years to life for a joint, the fact that they are allowing any version of marijuana in any situation is a step forward. And I bet you within 3 or 4 years, they have a meaningful medical marijuana program in Texas because it helps people. And once they figure that out, they're going to want to adopt it as well.
I bet that's true. So we've got places like Texas, Vermont, Florida, New England, all over the place. There's people fighting for marijuana everywhere that we look in America right now. Tell me, what is NORML working on right now, and what can people out there in our listening audience do to help?
Well, on one hand, we want to make the best case we can on the federal level. So we're spending a lot of time working with members of Congress, and we have more members of Congress this year than ever before who are willing to stand up and call for meaningful reforms. I mean, full legalization and get the federal government out of the picture altogether, et cetera. But we also recognize that the progress for the next 3.5 years at least is going to be at the state level. It's not going to be with Jeff Sessions as Attorney General or Donald Trump as president. So we will do everything we can to support our many state and local affiliates. I think that what you will see is 5 or 10 more states adopt full legalization over the next 5 years, and probably all of the existing states adopt a version of decrim. In other words, even in the most anti-marijuana states in the country, like Oklahoma and Texas, etc., they are getting close to realizing that it is absolutely absurd to treat their own sons and daughters as criminals simply because they smoke a joint. So you can decriminalize small amounts and eliminate 90% of the arrests. I think we'll do that in the next 5 years in all states in the country.
Well, that's an amazing goal, and I know that only happens if we have people. So this is a reminder to our listeners out there. If you think that this is a noble and exciting and a worthwhile way to spend your time, you are right, and we want you to help us. So if you want to join the fight, check out the NORML website. That's NORML.org. And that's about all the time we have for this week. I'd like to thank our host, Keith Stroup, for joining us from National NORML headquarters and encourage you to listen each week for the latest in marijuana news from Washington, D.C. and around the country. Once again, this has been the Keith Stroup Show. I'm Mikel Weisser, and you are listening to Cannabiz News. Keith Stroup Show was brought to you by ultratrust.net. Protect your assets from seizure, creditors, and legal action with UltraTrust's Irrevocable Trust Fund. Visit ultratrust.net to learn more, and while you're there, download their free report, Managing the Risk of Loss, and learn about ways to legally protect your assets. That's ultratrust.net. ULTRATRUST.net.